afternoon. I'm going to be your presenter and facilitator today as we talk a little bit about women on board and board leadership 101. I've got a slide presentation that I'm going to go through, and Takeda will give you this slide presentation as well as one additional handout. You are welcome to, if I reference anything else in the presentation, you're welcome to send me a chat, and I have so many documents and so many things I could share, but the way our presentation is going to go this morning, I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes on the real basic 101 of board member responsibilities as a full board of directors and then as a individual board of directors. So you serve on a full board and you also serve as an individual board member. So I'm going to talk about those items. I'm going to cover, and I'll kind of go through the agenda. But if there's anything that comes up, I encourage everyone to just post a question or anything in the chat, because when I'm through with the presentation, then we're going to move into a panel presentation where you're going to hear from some of our expert board members, one of which is one of my board members. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves at that time. I'll make sure that I introduce them, but I have 4 prepared questions for each of them to answer. And I encourage all of you to, post questions in the chat, and I have a reminder slide to tell you how to do that. So first part of our presentation will be very much me talking to you and telling you about board member responsibilities. And the second half is going to be very interactive, where you get to ask lots of questions from our expert board members and myself if you want to. So with that, I'm going to get started, or I think I'm going to get started. So today's objectives are welcome. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and Nonprofits First, where I work. We're going to talk about those roles and responsibilities. Going to talk about the individual board member responsibilities. I'm going to talk a little bit about fundraising. I think I have 4 slides because that's always sort of the piece from some board members or from potential board members that's like, oh, I don't know about that. And then I have a list of questions, which I also put in the chat, that Takeda will send out to you on questions you would want to ask as a potential board member before serving on a board of directors. And that's a little lengthy, but I'll cover it pretty quickly. Then you're going to submit some questions, as I said, in the chat for the panel discussion. I'm going to welcome our panel members. We're going to have some Q&A. And then if there's anything else at the end that you want to ask, we'll hopefully have a little bit of time for that too. All right, so let's get started. All right, that's me. That's my avatar, which I love because I never get old. It's awesome. I am a native Floridian. I've been in South Florida, or lived in the South Florida area, other than I went to school in Tallahassee all my life. So I'm a native Floridian. I've been in the nonprofit professional business for over 30 years, 30, probably going on 35, might need to change that. I've been a nonprofit executive, so in the executive director role, or a CEO or a regional president, for over 25 years. So I have that experience. I've served on more than 10 plus nonprofit boards. I currently serve on 3. I am also a small business owner in the community, I actually in the Fort Lauderdale, Broward County community. So I sort of understand the for-profit side too. I should say more than sort of, but my day-to-day work is definitely as a nonprofit CEO. I am a BoardSource certified trainer, so my training with you today has a very BoardSource slant. I'm a big believer at BoardSource as a super resource. You can download materials from there if you're a member of BoardSource, or you can, access any materials that they have on their website. But I think they're a great resource for all potential nonprofit board members, nonprofit executives, and the like. I'm also a True Colors certified facilitator. So if you don't know what True Colors is, send me a note in the chat and I'll give you some information on that. But that's something I did over COVID to kind of expand my leadership resources, and I really enjoyed that. So that's a very fun kind of better way to look at different personality types, and great team building tool. They even have True Colors for dogs. So I thought that was kind of amazing. So ask me about that if you're interested. So Nonprofits First is where I work. Nonprofits First is what I call an NMSO, a nonprofit management support organization. We work for our nonprofit organizations and affiliate members that that belong with us as well. Our mission, I'll tell you in a minute because there's a slide on it, is empowering nonprofit excellence. But we were established by a coalition of public and private funders. Our mission is empowering nonprofit excellence. Our vision is a community where nonprofit organizations achieve their highest level of community impact. And we wrote it like that because everybody's different. Our nonprofit organizations are always at different stages, right? Some are small, some are young, some have been around for 100 years. So their level of success and community impact really depends on them and what they're looking for. And it's our job to get them there and figure out the resources to do that. And then we have a mission video, which I'm not going to show, but you're welcome to go to our website and check that out, learn a little bit more about what Nonprofits First does. But primarily, we do a lot of work in the nonprofit sector, and it's our job to make the nonprofit sector better. It's better, stronger, whatever we can do to make them better. So we do that through an accreditation program. We do that through, we have a 501c Pro Toolkit. We do education and professional development, which is why, Judith, I'm here today to help everyone learn a little bit more about board development and Board 101. We're a membership organization, so our nonprofit organizations are members, as well as some consultants and folks are. So like the Women's Foundation is a member of Nonprofits First, and many of our panelists as well. We have a leadership development program for what I call the next generation of nonprofit leaders, because folks like me that have been doing this 30 some odd years can't be around forever. So we've got to develop our next generation of nonprofit leaders. We have management support services in the area of financial management and bookkeeping. We have a job board for those looking for jobs or perhaps posting a job as a nonprofit. We do funding and development research, governance and Q&A training, which is what I'm doing here today. We also have about 85 consultants we work with here in our community through our affiliate membership. And of course, we do our Hats Off Nonprofit Awards, which we just finished last week. And next year it will be Tuesday, October 5th. So if you didn't get a chance to join us last year, mark your calendars for that. It's really an amazing event, awarding and rewarding and honoring our nonprofit sector. So that's a little bit about what I do. And let's get into nonprofit boards, roles, and responsibilities. So there are 10 that BoardSource subscribes to, as do I, and that's what I'm going to cover today with all of you. And these are sort of the basic roles and responsibilities of the nonprofit board. And when I say nonprofit board, I mean the board as a whole. I'm going to cover individual board member responsibilities. They're similar, but my first job will be to talk a little bit about what, as a board, what are you supposed to do? What are my responsibilities? What are my expectations? So number one is determine the mission, vision, and purpose of the organization. So I just shared with you Nonprofits First mission and vision. That articulates the why, the whom, and sometimes the where for which an organization exists. It is the board's responsibility, is not staff or executive or anybody else. It's the board's responsibility. So if there were to be a change in that mission or vision, that would come from the top, from the board of directors. Why I always say the mission and vision and purpose should be short and sharply focused. That does vary depending on organization. I find it a lot easier. We just worked on ours where I said it's, empowering nonprofit excellence. I can remember that. And so can my board members, but it really is, that's one of their primary responsibilities. They provide direction for the organization. They hopefully inspire passion and commitment. And the mission and vision, obviously, the mission should inspire passion and commitment, but it also should be revisited every 3 or so years. It doesn't mean changed. It just means probably revisited and said, are we still going in the same direction in terms of our mission and vision? Have we shifted? You'll hear me talk a little bit about that later. Number two, perhaps I say one of the most important, is selecting the chief executive. I call this position the chief executive because sometimes it's called an executive director. Sometimes it's called a CEO. Sometimes it's called a president. It's the chief person that will be running the organization, what I consider to be the day-to-day of the organization. And in many cases in a new organization, that's a founder. So in a small organization, usually it starts with someone like a founder, but at some point as the organization grows, sometimes the founder becomes a board member and they choose a new executive, or vice versa. Sometimes the founder becomes the executive and is no longer a board member, and the board has selected that person. But it's their, I consider one of the most important responsibilities of a nonprofit board member is making sure and ensuring that the chief executive in the organization is not only the right person for the job, but somebody that's going to be there. So that's why I said the most significant decision affects the organization's continuing development and effectiveness. It's really obvious when I've worked with so many nonprofits. So some have struggled with this. I've worked with so many that I've crossed that path. And it really does have a significant effect on the organization in not necessarily the most positive way. So it's really, really important to have the right person in that role. The board must reach consensus on the chief executive's responsibilities, and sort of, if you're looking for a new executive director, that's something that takes time. It needs to be something, like I said, there has to be consensus on. It's generally not something that can be done quickly. So it's just one of the most important things to be able to know that if you serve on a board of directors and you have this amazing executive director in place, that person could go somewhere else. That person could decide to leave the area. So just understand, as a potential board member, that is the responsibility of the board of directors. And of course, succession planning is part of the board's responsibility to ensure preparation for the future. So you have this amazing person. However, they may not be there forever. So you always have to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that succession planning means, what are we going to do if this person leaves? What's the plan for that? Are there people, is it a large organization where there's staff that could be developed? Are we going to, regardless of whether there's staff that could be developed, are we going to look outside? It's just important to have that discussion from time to time and some sort of plan in place for what happens tomorrow if this person decides to leave today. Number 3 is, okay, you've got your mission and vision. You've got the very best person you could possibly have that's going to run at the day-to-day of the organization. You got to be sure that the board of directors supports and evaluates that chief executive. They need the support from the leadership, which is the board, to handle the day-to-day. Clear goals and objectives. So likely this would be in accordance with some sort of business plan, or what I call a strategic plan in the nonprofit world, but very, very important. Conduct an annual performance review. So it is the board's responsibility, or maybe a subset of the board of directors, to be sure that they support and evaluate. So annually, some sort of performance review needs to occur. Like I said, likely that's in accordance with some goals, but very, very important for a well-run, well-rounded, well-developed organization should have some sort of plan in place for evaluating their chief executive. And the chief executive, I'll use myself as an example here, or I could use Mary, who we have as a panelist. She's responsible for evaluating everybody else, or she may have layers of folks that she does. But again, it's only the board's responsibility to evaluate the chief executive and no one else in the organization. That chief executive would evaluate those folks, or maybe management would, but not the board of directors. They just evaluate the chief executive. Respond to any requests for help or encouragement when needed. So, occasionally, or maybe more than occasionally, folks need to, the person running the organization needs to know they're doing a good job through a performance evaluation, but also through encouragement, or they might have certain requests. Hey, I just applied for funding to so-and-so organization. Do any of you board members, do any of my board members know anybody there? Could you put in a good word for us? Could you, help support us in our plan for that, or me in my plan for that? So just being there for that person. Maybe it's even just a sounding board from time to time, because the chief executive, you've heard the expression that's lonely at the top, really needs to have the board supporting that person, whoever he or she is. That's their sounding board. That's who they would go to for, whether they have challenges or positive experiences. And clarifying boundaries. And of course, I always say macro manage, not micro manage. I hope everybody knows what I mean by that, but that's sort of staying in your lane or staying out of the kitchen. If, unless you're asked to come into the kitchen and help out a little bit, which does happen from time to time, but board members are really, if you've got the best person and you're supporting that person, second guessing, micromanaging, that kind of thing really undermines the authority of that particular person. So it's really, really important if you're a potential board member or currently serving on a board that you sort of understand where you stand as a board member in working with that chief executive. And it's definitely not in the day-to-day work. That is where I have seen what I say, the wheels fall off the bus in an organization. So it's just something to understand. If you're going to be giving board service, it's really important to understand these roles and responsibilities and sort of where you fit into that. Stand by and support. You've heard me say that a few times. And you may have to do that when certain constituents or constituencies don't like a certain decision. So this does happen in organizations when, some sort of decision is made. Maybe it's with a national organization where something comes down from afar or from somewhere else, or it could be something that's happened in the community where the organization has to take a stand on an issue and not everybody agrees with it. But if you are the loyal board member that you are, it is your job to stand by that executive and stand by the decision. If you don't by chance agree with that, then it might be time to make a change. But it's really, really important to sort of understand that when you take on that role of serving on a board, the board needs to be together, supporting the executive and the organization and of one mind. All right, where am I? Number 4, I think. Ensure effective planning. So what does this mean? This means ensure that the organizational planning occurs. Ensure there's some sort of planning that occurs at least every 2 to 3 years. I call this a strategic and or business plan. And in the nonprofit world, it generally is called a strategic plan, but it's very much like a business plan. It's board's responsibility to make sure that happens. It might be suggested by the chief executive, but if it's not, then it's the board's responsibility to make sure that it does and to ask, it's been 5 years since we've done our strategic planning. We need to take a look at that, or we need to do some new strategic planning. I recommend doing it, especially now after we've been through COVID. I think everybody needs to be going back to their strategic plan if they haven't done so already, because everything's changed and everything is different. But it may not mean a whole revision, but it's definitely something that should be looked at as a board member. So if you do currently serve as a board member, and we're talking about this today and you haven't yet done that, you want to definitely recommend or suggest that. And actively participate in the overall strategic planning process. So not only are you going to recommend it, but if there is a meeting where all board members are required to be there, you need to be there and participate actively in where that plan is going to go for that organization. And sometimes that will include the revision, or at least the review of the mission that you heard me talk about first. Ensuring effective planning also means monitoring the implementation and progress of that plan. So that means, we did that plan 5 years ago. We haven't talked about it since. Let's have a conversation about that at our next board meeting, or it should be something that comes up, maybe once a quarter, maybe more, maybe less, but certainly more than once a year, in terms of knowing what your plan is and being able to monitor and implement the progress of that. It should focus on the big picture. I think I have this in here twice. If there are staff in an organization, and again, that always depends on size, or even volunteers, they would deal with sort of the day-to-day and the operational and sort of the tactics and initiatives of a plan. But the big picture, for instance, we're going to change from having 200 events a year to 100 events a year, which is probably pretty common these days. That big picture item would definitely come from the board of directors. All right, you heard me talk about monitor and strengthen programs. So this is sometimes where folks say, well, if I'm not supposed to get involved in the day-to-day, how do I strengthen, or how do I monitor programs? You're really doing that again from the big picture piece. So you're looking at what's the impact of the program. So Judith has launched in partnership with many organizations, nonprofits first included, this Women on Board training program to hopefully inspire and encourage folks to serve on boards that may never done it before, or perhaps inspire those that are serving on one to kind of do better, or to maybe expand their horizons. So her board might say, how many people did we train? And did any of them actually go on a board, or whatever the case may be? That's the board's response. Board can ask those kind of questions. The nitty gritty about how she did it and how they got there, no. It's kind of monitoring. So if we launch something new, how did it do? How did we do? How was the impact of it? Sometimes that comes in the form of what I call, I'm going to put it down here, a dashboard of like programs or metrics. I say that should all fit on one page if you're going to put it in your board packet and materials, because again, it's the big picture. It's how are we doing as a whole, not how did we do it, how are we doing? And also determining programs and services that are consistent with the organization's mission. So if you are a mental health organization, you don't need to be necessarily delivering meals to your constituents. That's a totally different mission, right? That's helping people with their sanity and their mental health, and that's really challenging right now. But if somebody said, well, we think you ought to be, if they're coming in or they're doing whatever, we think you ought to be delivering meals, or you ought to be feeding them as well. So that's a whole different ballgame. And those are the things that the board would say, well, I realize we might be able to get funding for that. And that seems like a really noteworthy program for a nonprofit to offer, but not our nonprofit, because that's not really what we do. So very, very important as you serve on a board to ask those important questions to avoid what I call mission drift. So staying in your lane. All right, ensuring adequate financial resources. This is the part where folks say, oh no, you want me to fundraise, you want me to go out and ask people for money. Well, not necessarily, but ensuring that there's adequate financial resources at an organization is the board's responsibility. So if there isn't, it's the board's responsibility, one, to identify that, two, to make sure everybody knows that, and to come up with some suggestions about how to change that, because it's always the board's responsibility to ensure those resources, to make sure that the organization remains financially viable. So it's that first question that comes from them. And they may hire somebody, or they may suggest to the chief executive that they hire somebody to help with this responsibility, but it's also their job to participate in any aspects of that need to be implemented. And to also, like I said, participate in any way, shape, or form. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to drill down on fundraising a little bit later. But if you're going to serve on a board of directors, and I don't want to discourage in any way, shape, or form, because it's not that big of a deal, but it is an aspect of board service that you will help with the fundraising efforts of the organization, and providing that there are adequate financial resources for the organization to operate. And the full board participates in various ways. They contribute financially, and that depends on what the organization requires, but it does vary per organization and per individual. Help and develop and execute a fundraising plan. Support and participate in the organization's solicitation and fundraising efforts. So you can count on that if you're going to serve on a nonprofit board, that some aspect of this will be asked of you, for sure. It would be very unusual for it not to be, if it's a nonprofit 501c3 board. Another responsibility is protect the assets and provide financial oversight. So here's how you find out if there's no financial resources in the organization. You should have financials that come to every board meeting, but at least quarterly board meetings. You will review and approve a budget for the organization. This is also something where at Nonprofits First, we drill down on this a little bit. So this is a resource. There's my dog barking. It wouldn't be here at Zoom if it weren't there. So you would have to review and approve those budgets, which is usually annual and then maybe a revision once a year. But that usually gets, so the budget would get developed by perhaps someone in the organization or maybe a finance committee, but it will come to the full board. And we do offer, like Judith had mentioned before, uncovering everything kind of in an overview today. But if that really scares you, we do courses at Nonprofits First on how to read financials, and financial 101 at Nonprofits for Dummies, or whatever people call it. We do that. So it's not something that needs to be scary either. It's just, it may not be what you do every day, but not difficult in any way, shape, or form to know what to look for and how to read financials and those kinds of things. Ensuring that an annual audit and a 990 occurs. So that also depends on the size of the organization, but there will be some sort of filing or fiscal review or otherwise that gets required. So if that's not been done at an organization, that's the board's responsibility to make sure that it does happen. And any risk management issues. So assuring there's proper financial controls in an organization. Who signs checks? Who's supposed to sign checks? I mean, is there some kind of financial controls into place? Ensuring that the organization is not subject to any unnecessary risk. So that varies per organization. Organizations that do Medicare billing and really difficult types of billing procedures and deal with vulnerable populations, which many of our organizations that we work with do. Risk management is different for them than it might be at an online educational organization, right? I mean, they're not even looking or touching people, but you still have to have those risk management procedures in place. And sometimes very helpful to have a board member that understands some of those procedures. Very helpful for organizations. So if that's your bent and you have a lot of experience with that, that's something you don't find all the time on a nonprofit board and is very necessary. All right, building a competent board. So this doesn't come up all the time, but it is the board's responsibility to take a look at itself and say, what do we need? How are we doing? They might be in really great shape and have everything they need as a full board of directors. But if not, it's the board's responsibility to say, wow, we need to look a little bit more diverse. We need to look, our age demographic is all one area, or we don't have anybody that can help us with X. Risk management, perhaps. We just don't have anybody that has that experience. We don't have anybody that knows anything about nonprofit finances. So it's the board's responsibility to kind of take a look at itself and help build that. How does that happen? Sometimes there's a governance or nominating committee, or it could, and it could be their executive committee serves as this purpose. I feel pretty strongly that there always needs to be a governance or nominating committee in place. And they can do two different things at once. Governance, meaning we look at bylaws and legal documents, and nominating meaning we interview candidates and that kind of thing. But those of you that are with us today that are interested in board service, I would hope when you approach an organization, they will have a nominating committee and they will have a process in place for how they do bring new board members on. But it is the board's responsibility to take a look at that too. Are there vacancies? How do you fill those vacancies? That's all part of building a competent board, and articulating any expectations. So perhaps the nominating committee will come up with, these are our expectations of a board member. You need to serve on committees. You need to attend at least so many board meetings a year. You need to contribute this number financially, that kind of thing. But they would come up with what that is. They would participate in orienting new board members. So when you bring somebody on, what happens when they come on your board of directors? Do they get any kind of training or orientation or materials or whatever the case may be? And evaluating the board's performance as a whole. So this is something I haven't done in a while, and that is provide an annual performance to the whole board of directors. So you could probably expect that as well. So we've talked about all these responsibilities, right? How are we doing on those? So you can expect to see some sort of evaluation or board performance as a whole, sometimes as an individual board member and sometimes the board as a whole. All right, ensure legal and ethical integrity. That's adhering to legal standards. So we all have them. Every state has them. behave ethically and with integrity. This is always a difficult thing to talk about with folks in terms of what does that mean? And I always say, well, if you have to ask, there might be a concern, but behaving ethically and with integrity is, abiding by whatever policies you have in place. Certainly not speaking negatively about an organization, making sure that you have some ethical behavior, some ethical standards by which an organization or board members have to adhere to, ensuring compliance with local, state, and federal and funder compliance issues. So sometimes funders have compliance issues, but there are certainly local, state, and federal compliance issues that all nonprofits have to adhere to. So as a board member, you need to make sure that that is done. And as a full board, providing transparency. So those are well, they seem transparency always seems a little esoteric to me, but so that is somebody asked for your 990, you're actually required by law to give it to them anyway. So you need to provide that. But putting that out there ahead of time is providing transparency. Right? So making sure that you're kind of open about all of the work that you do and who serves on your board and how much money you raise. And part of this is kind of like an annual report, but just being transparent about the organization rather than secretive. Really is, you want to be everybody should be as transparent as possible these days. So it's really making sure that as a full board of directors, you have that in place, and assuring some accountability. So those are some things where a survey or an assessment annually is very helpful because everybody kind of knows what we're accountable for. So if I'm supposed to raise $1,000 a year for this board of directors, is there an accountability for that? Is that something that we can see? Is it something that we know that everybody's participating in? There's a whole host of ways that an organization can appear to be accountable, but that depends on the organization, but the board's responsibility is to assure that it occurs. And maybe my friend Phil can talk a little bit about what more that means, since he knows a lot about that, serving as a board of directors with us. All right, and last but not least, as a full board of directors, and this is number 10, enhancing the organization's public standing. Speak well of this organization. Be an advocate for them. You are ambassadors and advocates. So if somebody asks about the organization for which you may serve as a board member, you have nothing but good things to say. And you might even speak about it before they even ask you about it. You want to be able to articulate the mission, the story, the accomplishments, what's going on there. I love serving on this board of directors. They do XXX, and it's an amazing organization. This is how many lives we've impacted. This is how many meals we've served. This is how many shoes we've put on kids' feet. This is how many books have been read. Whatever the case may be, the board member needs to be able to tell that story, because it really comes out better hearing it from a volunteer. I could talk all day long about Nonprofits First and how great we are, but when one of my board members says it, or even a volunteer or somebody else, it means so much more. Or perhaps an organization we serve. Always better from a peer. Certainly keeping confidential information confidential. So if you want to serve on a board of directors and you're not good at that, you're not a good secret keeper or keeping things confidential, might not be the best job for you. But that's really, really important, because there are things that are said at board meetings or in even committee meetings, or even in passing with conversation with board members. Confidentiality is extremely important. It's extremely important for us as people, and extremely important for boards of directors as well. And don't be afraid to garner support from the community. That's really important, whether it's financial support or general support. That's all part of enhancing the organization's public standing. And you may have somebody hired like a me or a Mary or somebody that does that. But imagine how much greater reach you have when all 10 of your board members are speaking well on your behalf. It's really, really important to have those folks be your enhancement in the community and speak well. So if you want to serve, that's going to be part of those responsibilities. And I am watching the time. All right, individual board members, I'm going to whip through this. You got to attend all your board and committee meetings, or as many as you possibly can. If you've got a lot of commitment or personal or whatever the case may be, and you can't give a lot of time, you may want to rethink it until a time that you can, because it's really important to be able to participate. Be informed, as you heard me say, about the mission and vision and services, programs, whatever you need to be as an individual. Review the agenda, supporting materials prior to board meetings and committee meetings. Hopefully you would get them ahead of time, so that you need to make sure that you're not going through stuff right when you're going through meetings. Serve on committees or task forces. Take on special assignments. That's going to be something that helps the organization move forward. Make that personal financial contribution to the organization, whatever you can do. I mean, there might be a requirement in place at an organization, and there probably will be, but sometimes it varies. So if all you can do is this, but I can introduce you to this, or they call it sometimes a give or a get, make sure that you're open to that, because that will be something that you're asked. Certainly talk about the organization and advocate for the organization. You might suggest potential board members or committee members who can make a significant contribution to the work of the board or the organization. So that doesn't mean go ask somebody to serve on the board. Go through the process, like we talked about nominating. That's like one of the worst mistakes I've ever seen at nonprofits, is, you know, one board member asks another guy at a cocktail party, or a woman or whoever it is, hey, you should be on our board of directors. Might not even be a good fit. There's a process for that, but definitely make those suggestions. I've ran into somebody, or I met somebody, or I know somebody that would be fabulous, and they love our mission. So that's also something important to do as an individual board member. Keep up to date on developments in the organization's field, whatever that may be. You want to make sure that you know what's going on. Follow conflict of interest and confidentiality policies. Every board member and every board and organization should have them. Certainly refrain from making special requests. This is my stay in your lane thing of staff. You know, you go through the protocol. You know, if it goes to the executive first, let them make those requests if there's something a board member needs. Assist the board in carrying out its fiduciary responsibilities, such as reviewing the organization's financial statements, everything we sort of talked about, reviewing those things. Make sure you understand, like I said, make sure you understand them. If you don't, there's plenty of places to go to get to bone up on that kind of thing. My little quick thing on fundraising, because I told you I was going to spend just a few minutes on it. The board's role is to ensure there's a case based on a clear mission or clear purpose. So if we're going to go out and fundraise, what do you want me asking for? What am I asking for? Is it for the general mission? Is it for something specific? What is it? We need to know that. Establish strategic priorities and ensure a development plan, which means that might be working with a development person in the organization, and it might be having a committee on the board, but making sure there's some sort of clear focus for what we're going to be doing when it comes to fundraising, and making sure there is one. Create fundraising and donor recognition policies. That might, again, be a development responsibility, but it's the board's responsibility to be sure that it occurs. Participate in and support fundraising. You've heard me say that about 6 times. I want to make that pretty clear that that's something you're going to be asked to do. I see Mary smiling at me. It just is. You know, establish a board financial commitment policy. I find that be very helpful in a nonprofit organization. But maybe if you serve on a board, or you're new to a board and they don't have it, and it's kind of hodgepodge coming in kind of not very consistently, it's a great idea to make that suggestion, to say, you know, we probably should have some sort of financial commitment. Maybe it's everybody gives over $100. Maybe it's everybody over gives $10,000, whatever it is for the organization. Having that in place really sets that expectation. And as you bring on new people or become involved in other boards, it's really easy to ask that question. You know right off the bat whether you can serve or not, based on maybe what that number is. Individual, like I said, make a meaningful contribution, identify and evaluate, cultivate prospects. So you might not be able to make a big contribution, but you know a bunch of people who can. So make those introductions. Organize and attend special events. If the organizations have events, which most do, board members should be attending those, or at least supporting those in some way, shape, or form. And you might be asked to attend a face-to-face solicitation. You might not be asked to do it. So again, don't be scared, but you might be asked to attend and support the person that's making the ask. That's something you kind of learn to do over time. But any board member can write or sign a letter saying, hey, would you consider giving to this organization? That's not very difficult to do. And signing and thanking donors isn't either. So that's kind of after the fact, and making sure that if you run into somebody anywhere and you're serving on a board, or you might be, and you know that that contribution has occurred, don't miss that opportunity to say thank you, because it's really, really important to do. This is just a graphic that'll be in your slides that talks about where most of the money comes from in nonprofit organizations. But it's always pretty interesting to me, because a lot of people think it comes from grants and foundations and those kinds of things. And it's actually the reverse of that. Most of it comes from individual donors. And this is true today, even though this is an old graphic. It is true today, even with COVID and what we've all been through. The majority of funding that has come through for a lot of our local organizations is still coming from their individual donors and individual people. So it's interesting. I always think it's interesting to see. So I wanted to give it to you so that you kind of have that knowledge before going to another organization. And it's not that way with every organization, but this is national numbers. The majority of the money comes from individuals and donors, and not corporations and gifts and those kinds of things. So it's always interesting to see. And very important that boards participate at 100%, which means everybody gives something, because it demonstrates a personal commitment. It gives board members confidence to ask others to give. You know, if somebody says to one of my board members, well, does everybody give on your board? And they say, well, no. Then why should I? Right? I mean, that's just standard. It encourages other funders to give too. If everybody on your board gives, and they always ask this question, it just sets the tone, right? If the board isn't committed to give, then why should I, right? And it creates some ownership for the board members, most definitely. And I always like to say, because philanthropy is contagious, and that's not a joke. It's not meant to be cliche, but I mean, it does feel good to be able to give and donate to others. It does. There's no doubt about it. And it really doesn't matter how much it is. It really just matters that everybody participate. All right, I'm not going to go over this because I'm almost running out of time, but I put this handout in the chat. Takita's going to send it out, because I only put it in here really to let you kind of look at the questions, because I'm not going to go over every one of these questions. I didn't intend to, but it's very, very helpful handout that I have given that you all will get. And it's also in the chat that talks a little bit about what should you ask. And many of them kind of mirror what I said to you today. So is how many people are on the board? When are your meetings? If the board, or if the organization board meetings meet on a day that you have a staff meeting every day, or you have a leadership meeting, and you can't change that, then that's a no for you. That's a pretty quick way to find out, right? Because that's never going to gel for you. Who are their other board members? Do I know anybody else on here? Who does the organization serve? Some people, you want it to be something you're passionate about. Do you like just children's organizations? Do you not like children's organizations and want to work with adults? Do you want to work with animals? Happens to be a passion that I have. I happen to like animal rescue organizations. And so in my sparage and in my donations, I always donate to those. So that, when you're looking at what you want to do or where you might want to serve, it really should call to you in some way. And you should do some experimenting about that sort of thing, because they're all over the place. Is the environment where you want to be? Are you an arts and culture person? I mean, there's so many nonprofits where you can serve and who need your service. So it's just really important to have these questions. And there are a lot of them. There's 2 pages of them that I gave to you. But that talks about individually, what am I asked to do, and who do the organizations serve, and those kinds of things. And then we get into a little bit more about how often do board members receive financial reports and stuff like that. But I promise you, if you do an interview with a potential organization, you ask all these questions, they're going to think you're really smart. They're going to say, this is an awesome board member, because these are good questions to ask. You may not want to ask them all. They might be like, oh, Lord. But definitely, pick out a few that mean something to you, and then ask these questions. And with that, I'm done with my overview with maybe 3 minutes over. We're going to move into the panel part, but I want to take a look in the chat and see what we have in there. And I'm going to ask, because I see Mary and Phil, and Bernadette doesn't have her camera on yet, but hopefully she will. And then our life coach, and I'm going to say your name probably wrong, Franzani?
That's perfect.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm so glad. So I'm going to take a look at these in the chat, but I'm going to start with, I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves. And Bernadette's got an awesome Santa or an elf hat on. I like that very much. Very nice. Mary's at the top of my screen. So I'm going to start with you, Mary, for a quick introduction. Then I'm going to move down. Franzani, you're next. Phil, you're next. And then Bernadette.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yes.
So I am Mary Hart. I'm the Executive Director of Dress for Success Palm Beaches. And I've been in this role since July of 2016.
Awesome. Franzani?
My name's
I like that
Franzani.
name.
Thank you. My name's Franzani Etienne. I sit on the board for Dress for Success. I've been on the board about a year, and I'm a life coach.
Phil?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Phil DiComo. I am on Jessica's board at Nonprofits First. I'm also on the board of the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County. And in my day job, I represent nonprofit organizations. So I serve as outside general counsel for nonprofits of all sizes.
Bernadette?
Hi there. Well, I've been working really hard at the North Pole on toys. No, actually, my real job is I am the program director and I handle community relations for WPTV. I've been there a very long time, 39 years. In that time, I also have served on two nonprofit boards. One is the Literacy Coalition of Palm Beach County, and I've been on that probably a good 22 years, maybe at this point. And then I've been on the board of Dress for Success since 2011. So, and then involved with a number of nonprofits in the course of my job at the station, where we've worked with Heart Association, Coleman Foundation, the Urban League, the United Way, lots of different nonprofits.
Awesome. Very good. Lisa, we have lots of experience. So I'm going to remind everybody, if you've got a specific question, to go ahead and submit it. But I do have 4 questions, and I'm going to go ahead and stay in that order, if that's okay with you all, because that's who I can see. It's going to be Mary, Franzani, Phil, and then Bernadette. So my first question is, what inspired you to serve as a board member? And for some of you, that's going to be a question that happened a long time ago. But I would love to hear what inspires you to serve.
So Jessica, do you want me to answer that as a director?
You can answer it either way. Maybe because I know you have done both.
Mm-hmm.
So
for me, my background, I was in the corporate world for over 20 years. And doing that, well, in that role, I served on a couple of nonprofit boards. And when I dropped out, if you will, in 2007, my goal was to start working for a nonprofit, because I loved the mission around the nonprofit world, and felt that, from a passion standpoint, that's where I wanted to go next in my career. So it didn't happen necessarily right away, but it did evolve to that. And my why is, again, because I love the contribution that nonprofit organizations make. And most everything I've done has involved empowerment of women in some way. So my passion for this particular organization, just before this, I worked for the Women's Chamber of Commerce of Palm Beach County, which again is very much focused on women in business. But in this case, this was such a great transition for me to go into a role that focused on economic empowerment for women in a different way. So it definitely was, women economic empowerment for women, and now working with the underserved population. And I saw, one of the questions about finding out in
Right.
terms of job openings, which I'm sure we'll cover, are board openings. But in the case for me, this director position was posted. I think it was posted with Nonprofits First, and then some individuals that I knew in the community, personally reached out and sent information to me about the job opening. So, this was a great way for me now to marry my passion with a source of income. So it was just like the perfect place I wanted to be at this point in my life.
Awesome. And Franzani serves on your board of directors. So what was your inspiration?
Yeah, so my background professionally is in nonprofit, and when I moved into the for-profit world, I worked in employee experience, which included working with nonprofits as well. So when I started my own business 2 years ago, I'm really passionate about personal and professional development. So I just knew I wanted to get involved in the community. I knew I wanted to make sure that my personal business was also aligned and that I aligned myself with nonprofits that I believed in. It's always been a passion for me. So I kind of let it happen. I work closely with the Women's Foundation as well. And at one of those events, I ran into Mary Hart and we started working together pretty quickly. And Dress for Success, the mission is very aligned with what I believe in job readiness and personal and professional development. So it was really about, I've always had a passion for nonprofits, having worked in them and then worked with them in corporate. I just wanted to make sure that I was continuously giving back to the community in a way that made sense for me.
Awesome. Phil?
So similarly, I worked in nonprofits. I started my career, first 15 years, I worked in the nonprofit sector. So, I already had an interest and a passion. And so when I transitioned to law school and becoming a lawyer, obviously I knew I wanted to help organizations that I was passionate about. One of those early on was the Literacy Coalition, where I served with Bernadette, and other organizations now. And just to follow up on what you said, Jessica, a big part of serving on a board is knowing the mission and feeling passionate about it and wanting to make a difference. And that's, I think, the common trend you're hearing is we're passionate about the things that we do, and that extends to serving on boards.
Yes. Bernadette?
Well, actually, for me, it started pretty early, and it wasn't necessarily because I wanted to be on a board, but when I first started at the station many years ago, we had committed to doing a telethon for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And my general manager said, it would probably be good for you to join the board of that organization. And that way you can, work more closely with them, and they can understand what, our needs are going to be for the telethon and things like that. And so, I was like 22, just right out of college, and joining that board. And then the next thing I was working with the Urban League for their, EOD fundraising. And it was, certainly there's nothing to compare to what you see, the work that's being done by these organizations in the community and the different needs. But it's also a lot of fun. It really, if it's done right, it's a lot of fun, because you're meeting other people in the community, your peer group, you're meeting, people who are involved with some of the major companies in our area and the major people where people work, and like Pratt and Whitney was a very big member of the Urban League back in those days. So, you sort of get a sense of how the whole community operates, not just the nonprofit community, but all the different companies, whether it's FPL or any of these large hiring organizations in the community. You sort of understand all the intricate parts of how a community works, how a business can work hand in hand with nonprofits, why they help, who they help. And it's really quite invigorating. It gives you a better sense, ties you to the community. and kind of lets you know where you can have a place in the community, what your position is, and how you can contribute and give something back to all different kinds of boards in many different ways. So, but certainly literacy has been a big push for our company. Obviously, a television station that was originally a newspaper organization,
Right.
is very important. So that's a long time board and commitment. There's always been somebody from the station serving on that board. And then Dress for Success was just a natural fit. A coworker of mine was also involved on the initial board of Dress for Success. And she said, come on, it's going to be fun. Come on, it'll be fun. We'll have some laughs. That's a Die Hard reference in case anybody saw that movie. But
Yeah.
it is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun because you're with other people who are helping empower portions of our community and helping them where they need it the most. And that's a great feeling.
That's a great point, because it is very much about Franzani. You want to say something?
Thank you, Bernadette, for kind of opening the doors to like the other reasons, because that's so, other than being fun, but having worked in the nonprofit community in the past, you really do realize that it opens doors just to, like, I was starting my own business, having worked in corporate America, I felt very disconnected from what was happening, and locally. So it was about meeting people in the community, getting out there again, and getting connected. So it was about the fun and the different opportunities to network. Was definitely a definite huge driver, especially as a small business owner.
Yep, you're absolutely right about that. All right, well, I'm going to ask you, what's the most challenging aspect about serving as a board member? So there's always good and bad in everything. I'm also going to ask you what's positive later, because I like to save the best for last. But what's challenging about it, so that we can demystify that for some of our listeners and our viewers? Harry?
So from my observation, from where I sit as the director of the organization, the obvious is going to be the fundraising piece. So I'm not going to go there, but I think that's always intimidating. But I hope that this audience sees there's a number of ways of doing that. So it doesn't need to be as intimidating as it may seem. There's a number of ways to participate in that. But I think, we have what's considered a working board, which means that we expect of all of our board members to either be on a committee or chair a committee. So what I see is that for our board members, many of whom are still, working, some are retired, but many are still working and plus have personal lives. There's the time commitment. So there's the monthly board meeting. And then, if you're on a committee, there's usually a monthly meeting around that. And then of course, there's a lot of work around the big events. We only have 2 per year, a luncheon and then a sale in the fall. But I think, to me, I think it's the time commitment. So when someone is considering being on a board, I really think that that's what you need to, be sure that you're ready to make that time commitment. And, if you have the board meeting on your calendar, it shouldn't be a placeholder that if something else comes up, bumps it. And there's always going to be something that's going to come up that has to bump it. But, that's, my feeling about it is, when it's on there, it's pretty much, a definite, not just a placeholder for your meetings. And, unless it's really important to bump it for something else, don't move it. So I would say, and I'm, very interested in hearing from the board members' perspective, but I think the time commitment, and then, I also think when we're together, we have great ideas and plans. And then again, and I know this from being on the other side of it, when you leave the board meeting, now you have all these other things in your life that your work and your personal life that you have to do. And so sometimes your to-dos for the organization can slip. And I think, again, it's important to, to keep to keep those to-dos, not to overcommit. And then if you do commit, to make sure that you do carry through.
All right.
Thank you.
Franzani?
I'm pretty good with boundaries. I think the hard part is when you are in the meetings and you're throwing out all these really great ideas and you don't, it's the additional ideas that you're wondering, I can't commit to that. So I guess a good example is that, I have some experience in PR and marketing, that's my background. But I can't take on an entire PR and marketing campaign as a board member. I'm a business owner, to Mary's point, I have a personal life. But you're in these meetings and there are these really great ideas and you get this great momentum. But I think it's when you leave the meeting, and I'm pretty good at not committing right then and there, but I think that's the frustration. I guess it's like the slowdown of ideas. I think that happens in organizations and small businesses as well, but you have all these great ideas and not always enough hands to do them. And you can't do them all. Either you don't have the expertise or you don't have the time. So I find that to be the hardest thing. Is I usually want to give more and can't, or there are just really great ideas that we just don't have enough hands, or maybe don't have the expertise just yet to make those as big and grand as we may have planned or hoped in the first place. So yeah, those would be, I think, the hardest things, is not always having things come to fruition for those two reasons: either not enough people to do it, or not enough expertise.
All right, Phil?
So a couple of things. We have some really great CEOs, executive directors in Palm Beach County nonprofits, and so that's a great advantage. But when you have to deal with an issue with an executive director, at the board level, sometimes that can be difficult. You have good relationships, friendly relationships, and if you have to deal with less than positive issues with an executive director or terminating an executive director, that's always tough to do. Same thing if you have an issue with a board member who's not really up to par, not participating, or maybe has some negative issues going on in their life, and it may not be in the organization's best interest to have them on the board. So those kind of interpersonal issues are sometimes a challenge. And part of that is, as a board member, knowing kind of what your role is and understanding what your role is. For me personally, I also have the issue of being an attorney who represents nonprofits. So Jessica's known that, plenty of times I've said, I'm not your attorney. You need to talk to your attorney, the organization's attorney over at Legal Aid, because it's not my position I can tell you what I think personally, but I'm not going to give you my legal advice here because, of the conflict issues and things like that. I'm happy to have a conversation with you on a personal level, but, you need to get legal advice from your lawyer. And the other thing I see, by the way, is lawyers giving really bad advice to nonprofits, because the nonprofits look at them and say, well, you're a lawyer, you should know about our bylaws. And a personal injury attorney knows nothing about bylaws, but yet that's where you get your advice from, right? So that's the other thing, is from the general counsel side of things, I often get, things, can you look at this, or can you review this? And I look and go, oh my God, this is awful. Who did it? Well, our attorney on our board did it. Okay, what do they do? Well, he's a personal injury attorney.
Right.
Okay, well, that's not really the right person who should be doing your bylaws. Maybe, they have some expertise, but, so those are some of the issues that have come up.
Yep, and that's a good point, because not, just having an attorney on your board doesn't really cover the aspect of what's good for that nonprofit, right? I mean, you have to actually be a nonprofit attorney to understand that, but there are plenty in Palm Beach County.
Right.
Bernadette?
There are. We have some of the best resources right here. So absolutely.
We do. We really do. So that's a question anybody has. I have a few I can refer.
I just think sometimes our location is a little bit of a challenge for nonprofits, because we have a number of people that live in the community that are very wealthy people that owners want to write a check. And I think some executive directors, and of course not Mary Hart because she's here on the call, but and not the Literacy Coalition either, but there are nonprofits that fall into, well, this person needs to go on our board because they wrote us a big check. And
good point.
That sometimes they're not really a person who really even wants to serve on a board, or if they do, they don't want to get their hands dirty and help out. They don't want to be on a committee. They don't want to, do all of those things. They just want to write the check and then have some say so in how the board operates. And so I think sometimes that's a little sticky for boards because they don't want to turn down the money from somebody who's going to be generous, but they also still don't necessarily want to be beholden to somebody who just wants to sit on a board and have an opinion about how you run, but not really be a part of the actual operation of the board. And so I think that's a little bit of a challenge. And I also think that sometimes it's a challenge because a little bit to Mary's point, we have a lot of retirees who have the time to devote to be on the board and to physically help out. But that doesn't always give you a lot of diversity of trying to bring in younger people who have jobs and families and everything else that, pull at their time to be serving on a board. I also see that maybe down the road, we might all be facing a little bit of a challenge with the idea that after this pandemic, where everybody has sort of gotten into the idea of things like GoFundMe and CrowdRise, where, all I do is I get on my phone and I make a donation. And so I'm good. I'm done.
Right.
I do one-offs, we're going to have, distribute food for a food bank at this location. And so I did it and it's one and done. Whereas, you need to understand that nonprofits need help all the time. It's not a one and done situation. We need physical participation in things. We need physical help to do some of these events that are fundraising. And it's a year-long commitment because the problem doesn't go away because we handed out food once in a parking lot.
Right.
We did this one event over here and isn't that great? There's always a need in the community and it's an ongoing situation and it's not always necessarily something that can be, cured by just texting some money on a phone to a number kind of thing. It's a real roll up your sleeves and get involved kind of situation.
That's an excellent point. So I'm going to move on. We do have I have only seen one question in the chat, and this one relates to diversity and inclusion. And I do think I can speak from our board, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong. We've been working on that for as long as I've been at Nonprofits First. There seems to be more discussion about it lately. So that's kind of what this says. This question is, there remains a significant gap in the quest for diversity and inclusion. And I think that's true, but I don't think that's new. But I'm going to ask all of you, there's the question, do you see major changes on diversity board recruitment? Mary?
So I don't know that this is something new, but I can
either.
tell you when I joined the organization, I took over from the founder, and when, she did a great job. She did what she needed to do to start up an organization. And it was a good time to move into phase 2. So one of the first things, and, Bernadette could attest to this, that I noted was I felt our board should better represent the demographics that we serve. And we did not. It was all, middle-aged or older white women on our board. And so, we definitely took that into consideration as we looked for new board members. And, it's not like it's tough. There's extremely, amazingly qualified individuals, and, the board is so much better off for it, better understanding the women that we serve, more diversity in ideas. So, I think when we talk diversity, it's age, it's, cultural and ethnicity. It's, for us, we don't have gender diversity. We have all women on our board. We did have one man, and it was short-lived. I don't know if we scared him away, but and then also professional background. So there's a lot of ways to describe, to consider diversity, but certainly I feel from a ethnicity standpoint that we need to represent the people that we serve. So we're not, completely there yet, but we've certainly done a better job and we're better off for it. The ideas. And in terms of younger people, Fran is a great example of this, but we have group called YES, which is Young Executives for Success. And the idea there is really for them to have, fun networking events, but to then within this group, identify and groom some of these young women to then move on to the board. So definitely something we try to keep top of mind. We can do better, and the improvements we have made, we're very much better off for having done so.
Awesome. Franzani?
I don't know if I can speak to this holistically, having only really been on a board and not really being involved in boards when I was working in nonprofit. I feel like there's been a lot of discussion on our board and in all of the organizations I am involved in. There's been a lot of discussion, but I think that is also part and parcel of me choosing organizations that are open and interested in growth and in diversity and inclusion and things like that. I think something that has come up, interestingly enough, although we may not have a ton of gender diversity, we do have people coming into a program, and this is not from a board perspective, but something we'll have to consider and think about who identifies as a woman. And so we talked about what that will look like next year when that individual joins us and how to make sure that we're sensitive to that. And I think that's something we'll have to talk about at the board level as well. So from my experience, there's been a lot of focus on it even before this year, but this year especially, which I find heartening. And I think it's, I see it, nationally really, but yeah, all of the organizations that I've been involved in have been very well, and being women organizations focused on women have been very cognizant of those types of things even before this year, but definitely as this year has progressed. So I don't know if I can really speak to it much larger than my own personal experience.
Awesome. Phil?
Yeah, I would add that I think every organization that I'm on the board of currently, ones in the past like Literacy Coalition, most that I represent, keep very complex, and nonprofits first included, board charts that track, are we hitting,
Mhm.
the diversity levels we want? Are we getting the geographic diversity, the gender diversity, all those things? Professional, Jessica, you were talking about, different professionals that you want on your board. You want to have someone who's an accountant. You want to have someone who understands insurance or risk issues, so on and so forth. And most organizations today, and for a long time now, have tracked those things and have always struggled getting the perfect board composition, always.
Yep.
Some organizations identify people who fit certain categories, but then the people don't have the passion for the mission,
Yep.
or are involved in other organizations. So it's a constant struggle. And Mary mentioned one of the tools that organizations use, the young professional group, to try to get younger people in who can then move to the board. Another thing that organizations do is they look for people to serve on committees. So maybe we can bring in a couple of CPAs who will sit on our audit committee or a finance committee, who can then be elevated to the board when there's an opening. So there are things that organizations do on a regular basis. And honestly, while I would say over the last year, people have been asking the questions about, are we diverse enough? I don't think it's any different than what they've been doing the 5 years prior to that. I think most good organizations have been saying, are we reflective of the community? One issue we have in Palm Beach County, I see it all the time, is, do we have enough people from the Western communities? Are we representative of Belglade and Pahokee? And then how do we get those people? How do we get those people who are both interested, but maybe can also attend a board meeting in West Palm Beach or Boca Raton or Jupiter? And those are real practical issues that go along with this. I don't know if we're all doing a stellar job at it, but I can tell you that the organizations that I've seen have been very much committed to it, and are working on maintaining the composition of their board on an ongoing basis. And the best organizations, by the way, I believe in a board that has a lot of working committees.
Yep.
So that your board meetings aren't long and drawn out and go over every little detail. You do all that work in the committees. And, the best organizations have a governance committee.
Yep.
Typically now you're seeing governance and nominating committees combined, and they're meeting at least on a quarterly basis. And each of those meetings, they're saying, okay, let's pull out our board list and say, do we have any more ideas to meet, to find people in Belglade, or to find people who meet a certain classification. And then they go to the board and say, here's what we're looking for. Here's what we're sorely missing. Here's who do we know? Who can we identify? Who can we reach out to? Do we need more Hispanics? And we're not finding those people. Then let's have a conversation with these Hispanic chamber people. Let's have a conversation with other groups and find out who's passionate about what we do. So I don't think it's lacking. I think the success rate is variable.
Bernadette, you want to weigh in?
I would just agree with Phil. I think everybody, a good nonprofit, to look at the current board, and then when somebody drops off or somebody decides to leave, it's an opportunity to evaluate that position. If you had, say, somebody who was a representative from a company like an FPL or AT&T or somebody like that, you would go to them and say, well, who from your organization would you like to put on the board? And is it somebody who, can help us in any of these areas, but also still has a passion? That Phil's right. That's finding somebody who's also going to be committed to the organization is somewhat of a challenge sometimes. But then you find that out pretty quickly. They don't stay on the board very long because they either, find out that they, don't make it onto the meetings, or they're distracted, or they don't join committees. Committees is a great way to get younger people especially involved in some of your events. It's not as large of a commitment, and then they get to see a little bit of how everything works, and it's exciting and fun, and it sort of pulls them into what it is you're doing without necessarily biting off that big chunk of commitment of, I'm going to be there, for every board meeting, and the money commitment and everything else that's involved with it. So I do think committees are kind of the great sort of farm team feeder system of a good board. But, it is always challenging. And maybe now with Zoom, things like trying to get committee members who are in Belglade, or members who are in farther areas like Boca. We have a tendency to think Boca is a hugely, wow, it's 30 minutes away. It's
right.
Hinterlands. But getting some of those locations, people in those locations, to be able to participate is a lot easier now that we all know we can do things like this,
I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody's thoughts on that. And I think it's a good question. And I feel like that's not a new subject at all. It's like every time you look at your board composition, you say, we need this or we need that. And there is one question about young folks that having a younger professionals on the board. And I think the answer to all of that is the mix. Like Phil talked about, a lot of organizations have a matrix that basically says, we want this, we want that. I mean, and you work at that all the time. And you do have to have the vacancies as well. And they are out there. So for those of you that are asking about that, Mary's posted a few things. There's been a few things posted out there. Finding the organization that you're passionate about is probably going to be first and foremost. We have a site called Nonprofits First Cares where people post volunteer and board member positions. Our job board sometimes will have those that Mary mentioned at one time on what's out there. So there's a lot of different places to look for board service. But I think the first question to ask yourself is some of the questions I asked you as well, or I gave you, but also, where do you want to be? What are you passionate about first? And then try to find those organizations. I certainly work with over 500 different organizations pretty much on a regular basis. So happy to have you reach out to me and say, who works with domestic violence? Mary just posted a few. So we're happy to help with that. That's why we're here today. So one of my, I don't know if it's going to be my last question, but it might be. And that's, what advice would you give to a new board member? So somebody who hasn't served very long on a board, and they might be young, they might be old, they might be somebody that just finally decided. But what advice would you give them? Or on the other side of that, either a new board member or those that are with us today that are considering board service? Besides, yes, you should do it. What advice would you give them, Mary?
So I think, we keep coming back to passion, but I would first make sure that you narrow your choice down to, a mission that you are passionate about. Do your homework about the organization. Those questions, Jessica, that you shared are, amazing. So you want to start off right by picking the right organization. Really understand the commitment in terms of time and financial. Most organizations have some sort of financial requirement for board members. So understand that up front. So really have that understanding. Just like when we hire someone for a job, we want to make sure they really understand the job, so that it will be a fit. And a good nonprofit will go through a good vetting process. So for example, we have people meet with, I meet with them later in the process, but they meet with at least 4 other board members. So you also want to make sure that there's a fit, culturally within the board itself. So we've had some people that we just didn't feel would necessarily mesh with our group, and we have an amazing board of directors. I couldn't be more pleased with the women who serve on our board, but it's all been intentional. So, you want to make sure it's a fit for you, and hopefully they've done a good job of asking you questions so they feel you're a fit as well. And then as a new board member, again, continue to learn as much about the organization as you can, and, take time to meet with other board members to keep learning. Something we've talked about, and actually, I don't think we actually executed on it, but we need to remember this, Fran and Bern, but is to set up a buddy system. So an existing board member to, sort of mentor, if you will, and partner with new board members, so right off the bat, gain as much understanding, build relationships with existing board members, have coffee face-to-face or Zoom with existing board members, but just keep learning to really understand the organization. And, I think from there, and get involved immediately as well. So get on a committee, get involved immediately, because the longer you wait, I think the more difficult it would be to do so. So I will stop there and pass it on to Fran.
Similarly, definitely start with passion. And I would say start with committees. I think that's a great introduction. And I would also say, ask not what the organization will do for you. Because I was cautious not to mention business ventures or, things that promoted my business in the organization, because while that is a wonderful side effect of being around incredible people, as you end up working with some of them, that shouldn't be why you go into the organization, because it's work. You have to like it. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. So really thinking where do I want to make an impact, and starting there. Because I know as a younger person and as a small business owner, being on a board is prestigious. It's a nice thing to mention to people, especially as you're working with other businesses. And I'm not going to diminish that aspect, but make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, because to Mary's point, it's work. And you just want to have the biggest impact, and you're going to have the biggest impact when you care and when you're doing it for those reasons. So I would definitely say start on a committee and make sure that you're thinking about what you want to bring to the board and to the organization, not just what they're going to bring to your life and your business and your career or whatever that you're looking towards.
All right, so we have about 4 minutes for Phil and Bernadette. What
Sure.
advice would you give, Phil?
I would add, don't be afraid to ask questions, but do it appropriately. Don't sit in your first board meeting and ask a bunch of crazy questions that you probably should have asked the board chair prior to the meeting, or the executive director or CEO. So don't respect other people's time.
Yeah. Good.
because
good.
everyone's putting in a lot of time and effort, and you're going to do a lot of work. So, don't be that person on the board where everyone says, why can't you like ask those questions after the meeting or before the meeting? And that happens more than it should, honestly, which is why you need a good board chair to keep meetings moving. But don't be afraid to ask questions, and make sure you get a board orientation. Make sure you do your homework walking in, so that you can be most effective. And the other thing real quick I'll say is that I really see that it's a board member's role to look at the strategic plan, understand where it is that your organization wants to go, and understand how you individually are best suited to get that organization to close the gap from where they are right now to where they want to be. I think that's your most important role as a board member. Once you've settled in, once you've figured it out, once you've gotten beyond COVID or whatever the emergency or the thing you're dealing with right now is, to have that vision of where you've collectively decided you want to be and how to get there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Bernadette?
I would just say join a committee. It's not a lifetime commitment. Join the, if you this year you signed up for, say, the luncheon committee and you somewhat liked it, but you didn't care for it that much, or you thought it was not suited to you, then the next time around, go back and say, I'd really like to be over here on the bylaws committee or the personnel committee or the nominating committee or whatever, something else, and try it until you sort of, realize what it is you really want to do or what you can contribute to the organization. But definitely get involved and join a committee, because it's the reason why you're there on the board is to help with fundraising and moving the process of the organization and the work of the organization along. So you don't do that from the sidelines of just sitting at a board meeting.
Definitely not. All right, well, it's 1:30 on the nose, or 1:29 on the nose. So that gives me one second to answer one question that's in the chat that says, does every nonprofit also have an advisory board? So sometimes when I have more time to talk about board service, I talk about the difference between an advisory board and a board of directors. So the board of directors is the governing board. They have responsibility, they have voting, they have all of that. Generally, advisory boards do not. I mean, that's the true structure of how that works. And not every nonprofit does have an advisory board. I come from another organization where we had both the board and we had advisory boards because we were in all 50 states. So you had to have advisory boards because you couldn't possibly have a board that large, but we had people from the advisory boards that kind of served on them. So that's also not a bad place to start, is if an organization has committees or boards or things you can serve on so you can get to know the organization. I think a couple of people have said that before you decide to go on, the full board of directors, which is where you do have legal responsibility, as you heard me mention earlier, and all of that. But I hate to say that you could always dip your toe in the water and see how it goes. But again, if you do your homework, you ask those questions, you follow your heart and your passion, generally you'll find the right place for you. And if you want to do that volunteer service, nothing will be more rewarding, I promise. And I know everybody would agree with me on that. So I want to thank all of our panelists and everyone for their time today, and the Women's Foundation for putting all this together. Thank you so much for including us at Nonprofits First in this process and in this piece. And if you want to reach out to me, I put in my email a few times, and Judith and Takeda know how to find me. Happy holidays,
Thank you again
everyone.
to all of our speakers today and to all of the sponsors of the event. I hope everybody has a great holiday season, and we'll see you all in 2021.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great holiday, everyone.